Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. A group of concussion researchers have likened Run It Straight events to dwarf tossing, where organisers turn real human risk and harm into a spectacle. There are growing calls to ban these events, where two people run head-to-head at each other before making body-jarring contact. These sporting spectacles have gained popularity in recent times, with competitors promised thousands of dollars for winning. The social media-driven craze made international headlines earlier this year when 19-year-old Ryan Satterthwaite died after suffering head injuries in an impromptu contest with friends. Today on the front page, NZ Herald reporter Neil Reid is with us to take us through the latest on the world's newest full-contact competition. First off, Neil, let's start with an easy one. What is Run It Straight?
Run It Straight had its beginnings in America. It was a practice move used by NFL teams, basically running backs running into defenders, improving both defensive skills and running skills, trying to bust the tackle. From there, it ended up actually being banned in America by the NFL, basically over safety concerns. And in the meantime, it's become sort of somewhat of a social media sensation on both sides of the Tasman. The version of Run It Straight that we have in New Zealand and Australia is, two people running for about 30 metres away from each other. One person's got a ball. The other person's job is to either smash the ball carrier as hard as they can.
I wasn't even aware that there was a ball involved. I mean, I've seen some of these videos. They're pretty terrifying, and people end up convulsing on the floor in some instances.
Yeah, during some of the organised events in Auckland earlier this year, that the Herald went with a reporter and a videographer, and there were a couple of people that were knocked cold. There was another person that was lying on the ground convulsing. So that's quite a telltale sign of a concussion impact. It's definitely not for the faint-hearted. I think part of the issue with the health bodies that have called for it to be banned is it's okay for some of these big hits to be hit on a rugby field or a rugby league field, but these are actually athletes that are trained to, handle those hits as safely as possible. And in the background as well, both rugby and league, particularly in our part of the world, the laws have changed where, you can't hit someone above the shoulder line. And people can still get concussed, not just being hit in the head, but actually being, tackled around the chest or the shoulders. Concussions caused by the size of the impact, not necessarily where the impact's made.
Tell me about this research paper.
Yes, there's a group called the Repercussion Group. They're made up of academics, concussion experts, concussion researchers, and also people who are living with the impacts of concussion. So among this group, there's quite a strong New Zealand presence. There's Patricia Hume and Alice Theodon. They're both from the Auckland University of Technology, professors and very skilled in the area. Doug King, who is a very qualified nurse who's kind of made a real passion himself of researching concussion and trying to find answers to concussion and the impacts to it. And also one lady who's got coming from a different strand, Irene Gottlieb. Her husband is Jeff Old. He used to be an All Black loose forward in the late 70s and early 80s, a Manawatu rugby legend who, for the past probably 10 years, has been living with early onset dementia conditions. It's quite a sad story what's happened to Jeff. So amongst that four, there's also experts from the UK, from Australia and America, and they've been looking over the last few years at ways to make sport safer, ways to highlight the life-changing impacts that concussion can have on people.
And they reference dwarf tossing. What do you think the significance is of that comparison? What message are they trying to send when they compare it to such a derogatory sport, inverted commas? Because when was that a thing?
Dwarf tossing... Geez, it was...
would have been the 80s.
80s and 90s, yeah. So since probably the 90s, it's been very unpopular. I mean, there used to be in New Zealand sort of organised dwarf tossing events at bars around the country. That was sort of how it happened. In the white paper that the repercussion group have published on Run It, they've described it as, well, likened it to dwarf tossing in the sense where organisers, in their views, turn real human risk and harm into a spectacle. It's a pretty hard-hitting paper they've put out, and I think they've used that term really to make a bit of a stand, saying, look, for a while amongst some people who went to a pub, they found dwarf tossing entertaining. Similar with Run It Straight, some people find it entertaining, other people find it abhorrent, and they probably use the most emotional language that they can think of to get their point across.
The researchers liken the collisions in these events to car crashes without a seatbelt. What does that mean in terms of that brain injury risk?
In terms of the collision size, I mean, that's what they're saying. It's been sort of long talked about, probably the last sort of maybe 10 years, just talking about an impact on a rugby league field is from guys that are actually trained to take the hit. Their body's a conditioned to take the hit. It is like a 30 kilometre an hour crash. I think the risks are even more with Run It Straight because a lot of the people that are involved, they're not professional sports people. They don't work out in the gym 8 or 9 months a year to be conditioned to take these hits. So when you've got two guys or ladies that are fairly well built running at each other full tilt, there's no rules on where in rugby or league you can't hit from above the shoulder. These hits are shoulders to the jaw. It's several G's of force that are involved in the impact. So yeah, it's pretty scary to think it's the equivalent of a head-on crash without a safety belt. The rest of your body stops moving, but at the same time, your brain's still moving in your head. So something's going to have to give.
What is the incentive of signing yourself up to one of these events?
In New Zealand and Australia earlier this year, with some of the organised events, there was a prize of 20K, which is quite interesting. That the New Zealander actually won the $20,000 and went off to a world championship in the Middle East. He actually apologised for being involved, just in the sense that he thought it actually did portray a bit of a bad look for people's safety.
You heard about that one story about that kid, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty rough. Like, I feel sorry for the families that is enduring that pain from something that's been something that was safe, but that caused harm to somebody. That's not what it's all about. It's all about just making sure that everyone's all safe and making sure that they're all well trained, but also know what they're doing. Because that hurt me way more than anything else. Because man, like losing your life, like that hurt me so much. Because I was like, he could have been something great.
So there's obviously 20 grand. There was several other events in Auckland that were supposed to be held that were cancelled due to the backlash, and council then pulled out of allowing the organisers to use their venues. In the Middle East, there was a competition where $250,000 was up for grabs, and it's for a lot of people that's life-changing.
That is incredible. Yeah, that's $250,000.
Yeah, if you back yourself to put a big hit in, it's money that's hard to turn down. The risk of it.
Why do you think these events are so popular from a spectator's standpoint? Is it kind of like driving past a car crash scenario, that old chestnut?
I think definitely. I think the thing that kind of stuck out with Run It when it sort of exploded in such a sensational fashion earlier in New Zealand, it's very much, I liken it to motor racing and speedway. There's a lot of people that might not be huge petrol heads or like watching the cars go around the track, but there's a lot of people that go to speedway and motorsport in particular to watch the crashes. There'll be people that go to football or rugby or league that go there to see the big hits. And I think those big hits that you used to see in the 80s and 90s, especially in State of Origin, where it was actually glorified someone smashing someone into smithereens. I mean, those big hits are kind of vanished from the game because the game's been made to be a bit safer, where if you hit someone too high, it's actually illegal now. So there's definitely an audience out there that love big physical confrontation, love someone coming off second best.
This is the heartland of the hits, so and the participation's been unbelievable. So we're very happy.
What role do you think masculinity or the societal perceptions of being a big tough guy play into it?
Oh, I think huge, Chelsea. In rugby league, it's not just the professional level, but if you go into a dressing rooms at even a club level, which have done many a year. I mean, there are some people that really fire up. They see an opponent and they want to belt them, want to smash them. With Run It Straight too, it's not just the organised events. But if you look on social media of people doing it in the backyard, and unfortunately that we had a tragedy in New Zealand where someone died doing Run in the backyard. But these videos of mates standing over other mates after the polex, and I think masculinity and being the tough guy that definitely plays a part, unfortunately.
So there's a call to ban these Run It Straight events in New Zealand. Do you think the government has to actually intervene at some point for that to happen?
Yeah, most definitely. Obviously, the Repercussion Group doesn't want this event in New Zealand. It doesn't want this event anywhere. Auckland Council were very proactive earlier this year where they withheld access to their venues where Run It Straight events were meant to happen. And these events are offering a lot of cash for the winner. The only way that it can be banned formally is for the government to step in. That's what the Repercussion Group's calling for. So that no doubt would come down to the Minister of Sport or the Minister of Health making a ruling. We're yet to hear from Mark Mitchell, who's the Minister of Sport, on it. He's previously been briefed, as the government has been briefed on Run It, especially after the tragedy where Palmerston North team lost his life.
I mean, thinking of other ways to try and stop this in its track, you've got to think about social media platforms, right? This is where we're seeing all of the videos and this is where you're seeing all the traction for these events. Could we do something like, I don't know, getting tech companies to stop monetizing these videos? But then again, I'm thinking, well, how likely is that going to happen? Because eyeballs mean money for these tech companies.
The Repercussion Group is really hot on social media companies demonetizing that content. There's probably a lot of people that would back that, but yeah, social media, everyone knows that social media makes a lot of money out of advertising. Everyone in the media knows that, and I just can't see the likes of Facebook or Twitter or TikTok, Instagram demonetizing that. It's countless wads of cash that they're making from videos such like that.
In terms of the events themselves and people who sign themselves up to this kind of thing, I immediately thought, well, what's the difference between a Run It Straight event and if we were to, say, have that Warrior show? You remember that show in the 80s and 90s where normal people would go onto this show and hang
the gladiators,
gladiators.
Yeah.
What's the difference between, I suppose those people were quite athletic.
Gladiators is probably an early take on it, but there wasn't really. I think in Gladiators, you had helmets, you had padding everywhere, shoulder pads, knee pads, arm pads, and I don't think the hits were as brutal. Whereas with this, you've got people sort of running 20, 30 meters full bore at each other. The object's not to take someone down; it's to around the ankles. The object is to take someone down and knock them down. So it involves, 9 times out of 10, a shoulder to the jaw or some sort of head blow. People sign up for it, and if they get injured, unfortunately, that's on them. I think it could well open up a bit of a legal minefield down the track about, whether someone's eligible for ACC if they're involved in Run It, especially if Run It's banned. It's probably, definitely a case of buyer beware.
Can we ban a sport?
Well, that's where it's going to have to come from, either the Minister of Health or the Minister of Sport. They're probably talking about big money too. That the organisers of Run It Straight, they're not running a charity. They're running a highly, what seems like a fairly professional sporting league. You're talking about big events in the Middle East where winners from New Zealand can go and win potentially $250,000. I think if the government did sort of move towards banning that event, there'd be some lawyers that are probably line up to try and take on an appeal.
And lastly, I know the researchers talk about us having an ethical duty. What do you think about that weighed up with, well, people know what they're getting themselves into? At what point do we intervene?
Yeah, that's a good argument. But if talked to Jeff Old's wife. He was not even 60 when he started showing early onset dementia conditions from head blows in the 1980s. You talk to these researchers that are, especially from the Auckland University of Technology, that are already talking to players who are in their late 30s, early 40s from rugby, where the hits weren't as hard as what you see in this run. And these guys are already showing early onset dementia conditions, potential CTE. Their ethical dilemma is they're on the front line. They're dealing with people that are getting injured in a bona fide traditional sporting environment. They just don't want to stand by and watch more people. And it's not just professional. It's not professional athletes. It's Joe Blogs on the street having potentially life changing conditions while they chase $20,000 in a competition. I totally get where this group's coming from.
Thanks for joining us, Neil.
See you, Charles.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.